Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Peggy Conway, your Director of Neeley Alumni and Constituent Engagement here at TCU. And it's so much fun to see so many people logging in and seeing familiar names. So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. Quick reminder, the Alumni Advantage series is part of Neeley's commitment to your lifelong learning and success. It is meant to be a virtual lunch series designed specifically for you guys, our alumni, to provide you with access to innovative business knowledge from our faculty experts and thought leaders across industries. So we really appreciate you joining and making this series a real success. Quick reminder, today's session is being recorded for those who could not join us. And as always, we want to start by thanking our sponsor, Northern Trust, who is led in the Fort Worth market by Neeley alum Jeff King, who I think is joining us today. So thank you very much, Jeff King, for your continued support. And also want to thank our friends in TCU Neeley Executive Education who are powering today's content. So thank you very much. Before we get started, I do want to plug one special alumni opportunity that's coming up that we've not formally announced yet, and that is our Innovation Week. I want you guys to save the date for April 1st, the afternoon. We're bringing together a fabulous professional development opportunity for our alumni. We'll have a keynote speaker who is a nationally known futurist who's going to talk about what's changing in the world, why it matters, and what you can do about it. And then we're also going to have faculty experts talk about transformation and innovation of the company and transformation and innovation of self. So watch for more information on that, but save your afternoon, April 1st, to join us on campus for that opportunity. To get today's event started, I am very pleased to introduce today's moderator, Dr. David Allen. Dr. Allen is our Associate Director of Graduate Programs, so he provides strategic leadership on our portfolio of, is it now 9? If you look at both certificate programs and degree programs, is that right, David? So a broad-reaching portfolio of programs. And then in his spare time, he is also himself an internationally known scholar. His areas of expertise include talent management, employee retention, human capital mobility, and global business. So all of that is very relevant today. He holds the chair here at TCU, the Luther A. Henderson University Chair of Leadership and Management, and then also is a distinguished research environment professor with the Warwick Business School at the University of Warwick in the UK. So without further ado, let me turn it over to David.
Thank you, Peggy. I appreciate that. We'll have to talk about this spare time thing that you mentioned. Let me add my welcome. I'm thrilled to see everybody on the call today. It's as Peggy said, it's a really important part of the Neeley promise that we be a hub of lifelong learning. And so it's really exciting to see so many of you connecting with us in this way today. We've got a great topic. We've got great panelists. When we think about the topic of connecting through the chaos, the importance of executive presence, I suspect most of the people on this call have some idea what we mean by executive presence and what it means to try to communicate in a way that is going to be heard, in a way that's going to be authentic, in a way that is going to inspire others to have confidence in you and in your leadership. But it's becoming increasingly important, and I think in many ways increasingly challenging, and we're not all blessed with Morgan Freeman's voice as we think about how to do this. And so as we think about leading in this world where it's becoming ever more competitive, we're faced with constant technological change, we're all still dealing with the ups and downs and uncertainties of the pandemic. We've got an increase in virtual and hybrid work, which in a lot of cases was forced on us, but now in some cases is becoming more strategic. We got changes in the labor market with concerns about a great resignation. There's so many things going on. How can you cut through all that noise and really communicate in an effective and authentic way? And so we're gonna jump to our panelists now. I'm really excited to have these folks partnering with us. So I'm not going to do them full justice, but let me quickly introduce the panelists. And so in alphabetical order, we're fortunate to have Eric Harris. He's the CEO of MindHandle. He's got a long career working initially with large advertising agencies, worked with Yum Brands, led Pizza Hut's integrated communication team, but ultimately was inspired to found a training company called Gather Round that was focused on storytelling and how to use that for effective communication, and ultimately merged this into Mind Handle, which was an employment branding agency. So we're very thankful to have Eric here today. Lisa Northup, she's the Director of Human Resources at Elbit America. She's also got tons of amazing experience leading human resource and development in defense industry, in the real estate industry, and the financial services industries. She's worked with companies like GM Financial and Associa, and now at Elbit America, where she leads, in addition to other things, recruiting and executive and leadership development. And then we're also fortunate to have Jim Roach, who comes to us with lots of years of experience in corporate HR, leading learning and development teams at Verizon, at Link Simulation and Training. And we're super fortunate to have him leading our exec ed efforts here at TCU. So we're super excited. All of these panelists have a great background in the topic, but they come at it from slightly unique perspectives. And so we're gonna draw on that today. And so to kick things off, I'm gonna throw sort of a general opening question and get something from each of the panelists about what, in your mind, does executive presence mean today, and why is it so important? And I will just throw it to Lisa first, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, let's kick it off. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be part of the discussion. Executive presence today in 2022, it's important now. It's always been important. I think now it's about being intentional. You mentioned working in a hybrid work environment where you had people who are working from home, some people who are working from the office, some people who are dispersed in a different geographical location. And so I think you have to be very intentional about your presence. You can't just wing it all the time. You have to look at different ways to be present, whether that's using your camera, communicating with different tools, instant messaging, texting, phone calls. I think emotional intelligence is very important, and of course, being authentic. If you're not doing these things in the world we're living in today, it's going to be tough to have that executive presence and show what your executive leadership brand is.
Okay, thank you. Eric, do you want to give your perspective on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here today. I think, you hit on it right out of the gate when you said this, this chaotic time, it's shed a lot of new light on things. And, some of those things have been advantageous to business. Some of them have been issues, but shedding new light on it, the probably the most relevant of the last 2 years is that we're relearning that leadership and communication are synonyms. So how we communicate is really what's defining our executive presence, and showing up with intention and showing up in chaos relies on a foundation of very strong, very purposeful communications.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jim?
I'm going to follow both of them up and agree. David, I really like the way they both started, and I think Lisa hit it on the head with intention, right? So I think it's about intentionally showing up in the moments that matter and impacting them well. I had a chance to visit Deloitte University over in Westlake a couple of years ago, and they were gracious enough to talk to us about, well, how do we train our consultants? And they have a very strong view to that, and they compete, they think, in two markets very importantly for human capital. For their customers, of course, their consulting firm, and then for their employees. And they intentionally identify what are the moments that matter with either constituency, with our customers, with our employees. And I think, as Eric and Lisa both noted, where we live now and what we see in 2022, 2021, and the pandemic and just business disruption has provided a plethora of moments that matter. So it's about thinking ahead for what are those moments and how do I want to show up as a leader and impact folks.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. So, for the audience, I have developed a set of questions that I think could be interesting for guiding this. But what would be even more effective is if along the way you're willing to contribute some questions and guide the discussion in ways that will be valuable to you. So if you have any at any point along the way, please put those in the chat, and I and some members of the team will try our best to pay attention to those and to work those into the conversation. So please don't be shy about doing that. All right, let's jump in a little bit to some specifics. I think given that we're on this Zoom call today, I think it's worth talking a bit about maybe some of the differences, challenges, opportunities in Zoom, virtual, hybrid, technology-enabled, sometimes technology-forced world versus literally walking into the boardroom as we think about executive presence. So does somebody want to take a stab at talking about some of the key opportunities and challenges in a virtual or hybrid world?
Yeah, I can jump in here on this. So you know, an emotional connection with an audience is typically established at about 60% eye contact. And that can be really, really challenging in a digital world. You know, for example, Dr. Allen, I can see you and I can see the other panelists, but I cannot see the audience today. So I don't know if they're tracking with what I'm saying, and that's difficult. But especially for leaders who are embracing, you know, these new modes of communication, we have to find new ways to establish emotional connections when eye contact isn't possible. And that is very, very, it's very hard to do, but it's very important. It needs to be done.
Yeah, so I will say no pressure on any of the panelists to exude virtual executive presence during this. But Eric, several of the things you said connected with, I think, where Lisa started. I mean, talking about emotions, and I think, Lisa, you mentioned emotional intelligence and talking about the technological tools. Do you want to kind of follow up on that, Lisa?
Well, I certainly think that, you know, working from home and working in this Zoom environment, we have a lot of things. I mean, just right even in front of me, you have distractions as well. So if you're sitting at a conference table in a boardroom, or you're sitting at a meeting table having a face-to-face meeting, it's going to be a lot easier to not open your computer or not pull your phone up and answer an email, or not, you know, use instant messaging and message people back. But in the home environment, those are distractions, and it's very easy to say, oh, I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to do these things. You know, emotional intelligence, though, I think tells us we really have to manage this. We can't, you know, we can't get distracted and pick up our phone and answer a text, because people are going to see that. When you turn your camera off, people see that you're turning your camera off, and they're probably thinking that you're multitasking. So I think pulling emotional intelligence in and thinking about these things becomes important.
Yeah, for sure. Jim, I know you and your team have had to do a dramatic shift to trying to build virtual connections. What's your experience with this?
You know, I think they both hit on some really interesting topics. And for us, I think what we learned, David, is it's really about turning the dial up on thinking first for how I'm going to engage the audience, or engage my team, or engage a person individually, virtually, right? It's about thinking about the moments and how you've structured them to make sure you can get participation. As Eric said, are there ways that I can figure out what reaction am I getting? And as Lisa said, you know, using my emotional intelligence to do that. I think, you know, one of the things we've learned about managing teams in a virtual environment is to pay attention to trying to get the technology right and using it well, but using multiple channels, and frequently channels that individuals themselves prefer, so you can connect with them in a way that's meaningful to them. So we try to use multiple ways to do it, but all in all, I think it's about thinking ahead of time. I'm going to have this meeting, it's a class, it's a whatever it is, virtually. How have I structured that? How can I get participation from everybody? All those kinds of things.
Okay. It sounds to me like a lot of what you're all touching on has to do with being able to create connections with your audience, or with the people that you're trying to influence or inspire in some way. So what's the role of executive presence in creating those connections, whether it's with your team, with a broader audience, with where you're trying to influence a key stakeholder? How can you really build that connection?
For me, I think it's not building the connection whenever I get in the meeting. It's about the things that I'm doing outside of a meeting to build that connection. Whenever I was in the office, it would be stopping by, saying hello, getting to know that person. Not all of my conversations need to be about work. Some need to be about work, and some need to be about finding other ways to connect and build a relationship with someone. In a virtual environment, I have to do that differently. I have to pick up the phone and call. I have to set up a quick 5-minute, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, I just want to connect and see how you're doing meeting, and truly keep it to a quick 5 minutes. But I think it's about building relationship along the way, and using presence, honestly, and using connection to build that over time, not just in one meeting.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that. I think, once it becomes time for the meeting, a lot of things that, used to be our habits in, telling audiences what they can expect from their time in the room, they should absolutely translate into these new modes, these virtual settings. This is something that we work on in the executive communications courses is, you have to train your audience how you want them to participate. And it is your responsibility as the presenter or as the communicator to say, even if it's as simple as, hey, we only have 30 minutes together. I want to make the most of this time as we can. And so I'm going to ask that you focus. I'm going to ask that you leave your camera on. I'm going to ask that periodically you give me a thumbs up in the emojis or whatever it is, just so that I know you're with me. That's always been the responsibility of a presenter or of a communicator, but it is so much more important today.
Lisa's giving you a virtual thumbs up there.
Thanks, Lisa.
We're starting to get some questions in the chat, and I'm not going to take them in order, but there's some interesting stuff there. I'm going to stick with one that's still on this technology track a little bit, and then maybe we'll change gears into some other issues. But it's an interesting question just because it's so much in the press right now with the metaverse and virtual reality, and is this something that's from the perspective of developing your executive presence? Is this something that seems really transformational, or is this just one more technology tool? You guys have some perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think that any new technology is an opportunity. It presents advantages. The bottom line is we're from a very lizard brain perspective, we're a gregarious species. We want to be together. We want to create communities. Sometimes we can't. And this last couple of years has shown us that. People will find a way to get together, even if it's simulated. And that does present opportunities for leadership. Now, whether it's a fad or it's here to stay, I can't say. If I could, things would be different for me. But it is something that leaders can take advantage of.
I would piggyback on that, David. I had a chance when I was at Link Simulation Training to see quite a bit of virtual reality in its development form, right? And that is transformation, ability to virtually go, and in our case, we were teaching pilots how to fly or doing aircraft maintenance in a virtual reality. It's very strong and positive. I haven't seen as many. Eric just alluded to what are the ways that staffs interact and teams interact in a virtual environment. But what strikes me about that is, as it evolves, it's a new communication channel. And as a leader, I have to pay attention to the communication channels that are important to the folks I work with, not just what I like, know, and am at ease with. But if my team decides, boy, we love this virtual environment, that's something I need to be open to so I can communicate even better with them.
All right, thanks. So there's a question here about how can I help my students or my team members who have aspirations of professional development and ultimately reaching the executive level. I mean, I think all the panelists would agree that executive presence plays a role in that. But you've got lots of experience with those types of development paths, for example, Lisa. I mean, what's your experience with the role that executive presence plays?
I think executive presence is huge, but helping someone get to that level, I think, is really understanding where is it that they want to go, where is it that they're trying to go. Are they trying to make it to a CEO position, that's their aspiration of what where they see themselves in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, wherever they are in their career horizon. And I think it's helping them identify what are the experiences that you need to get there. What are the gaps that are holding you back from getting there, which may very well be around executive presence or communication or some other type of skill. And if those are the things that they need to develop on, first you have to identify it and then get very specific. What is it around executive presence that they need help with? I think there are pieces of executive presence. When you're so quiet, people don't hear you or don't listen when you speak up. So really needing your voice to have something behind it. That's a communication skill that someone would need to work on with executive presence. So I think it's just being very specific about what is the skill or what is the gap that needs to be developed, and then getting practice, helping them practice it, getting them opportunities to practice, getting them opportunities in front of the right audiences.
Yeah, I piggyback on that. David, when I was at Link, when we brought high potential directors into the executive committee meetings and reviews and things like that, we essentially did what she just suggested. We tried to think about what did they need individually. And then if you ask me what tended to show up as general needs in folks, I would say two things. One is when folks take the next step to the C-suite, it's really almost exponential the way your perspective has to open up. You're not running a function, you're helping run the business, you're helping lead into the future, things you didn't necessarily normally think of all the time. So having that perspective, having an executive perspective on how you can enter the context of a conversation and deliver it well and with impact were some of the skill sets that just started to have to ramp up just a bit as we saw people try to take that next step.
Yeah, I'd like to really dig into this a bit more, this idea, this question of to what extent someone can go about developing their executive presence. Like I was only half kidding at the beginning about Morgan Freeman's voice, right? Like, Lisa, you mentioned someone who might be naturally soft-spoken, or we know there's research, for example, that people who are taller are taken more seriously as leaders, and there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. So I'd love to hear all of the panelists' thoughts on to what extent this is a developable skill. Is that a word? And what are some of the key ways that people can go about developing it?
I'm happy to kick that off of this. All right, go ahead. I'll let you do that.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to start by saying, what a lot of people don't think about is how important authenticity really is. That, if we start with the expectation that to be a great communicator, I have to have Morgan Freeman's voice, well, then we're never going to hit that mark. But if we instead reframe it as what people really need is authenticity, what people really crave is genuine communication. And, that can come from Morgan Freeman or Oprah Winfrey or Christopher Nolan or any number of great communicators, but it's going to come through with your own voice. And really the goal is not to mimic or borrow from someone else's voice. The goal is to find your own. It's to find what makes you you, what's really important to you, and then develop and build out from there. And that's where like true emergent leadership comes from.
I think executive presence can absolutely be developed. I do think that you have to be knowledgeable and open to feedback. You have to know where your strengths lie And I think you also have to know how you stack up against potential derailers. There are things that can derail you from having executive presence or being able to grow further in a role. And it's important to know not only your strengths, but things that could be derailers from you, and working on both.
Do you mind giving a quick example of a derailer?
Sure. I'll give you several examples. Okay. Derailers can be things that, if this person took on more work, they would crumble. People's view that they can't take on more. Is resilient, can kind of take things as they come, compartmentalize, figure out a plan, and be able to move forward. Ego or arrogance, coming across with arrogance and people just not connecting with that. And probably seeing that as probably genuinely or authentically how that person is, that will stop you. Any of these things can stop you from being able to move up. And I think they're all part of executive presence.
Thank you. Jim, I don't think I gave you a chance to chime in on this question of how to develop your presence.
I think they've covered some really nice pieces there, and some of it's around balance and then your ability to ask for and accept feedback, right? So I think both things are really important that they mentioned, right? You think about authenticity and self-awareness for what are my strengths, values, my leadership style, what's important to me. And said differently, part of authenticity is trying to grow into the leader you say you want to be, right? So, and when you think about, I want to have this impact and I want to connect, the next step is to really understand, how do others perceive me? You can ask yourself to describe your own leadership, and then if you ask other key stakeholders to describe the same thing, there'll be a gap. And then so part of developing executive presence is stepping into that gap, and then, as Lisa said, which are the places where I need to grow and focusing on those.
Lisa, you mentioned arrogance as a potential derailer, but I think some of the definitions of presence involve being able to communicate confidence in yourself and poise under pressure and things like that. So I'd love some perspective from the panelists on how do you strike that balance between confidence and arrogance, and how do you demonstrate confidence maybe in the opposite case when you're not feeling it. We talk about people sometimes suffering from an imposter syndrome where they're in a leadership role and they're not 100% confident that they're 100% ready for it. How do you project confidence?
Yeah, look, there is a balance. You do have to have confidence and be able to show confidence, but there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. And I'm not sure I have a good answer on how to judge that yourself. I'm going to go back to, you need feedback. And my guess is someone who has ego or arrogance, they've probably gotten that feedback somewhere along the way. And so listening to that feedback, looking at those times where you've been given the feedback of, you have too much arrogance or confidence, and re-looking at those situations to think about, what words did I use? What were my behaviors? What were my actions? How could I have behaved differently so that this wouldn't have been the perception of me? And then on the flip side, if you struggle with confidence issues or not having confidence in a situation, I think we all have moments of that, or at least I'll be vulnerable and say, I have moments of that as well. For me, I think that it is identifying what it is that's pulling my confidence down. Does it have something to do with, I'm afraid I'm not going to have the right answer? Or is it a conflict situation and I don't want to deal with conflict? I'm giving examples. If you can name what it is that's stealing your confidence, then it can help you know where you need to practice development.
I would add to that there are two things that we teach, and actually we practice at Mind Handle, that I think can help with the difference between confidence and arrogance. One of them is the practice of gratitude. For any leader, coming from a place of gratitude is it's paramount, because if you can't think of something to say, you can always say thanks, and you should. You should start with that. People are putting their heart and their soul and their selves, all of it, into their work, and you can always thank them for what they're doing. If you have an audience with someone and you don't have anything to say thanks. But it is a practice. It's something you have to set out intentionally to do. You have to say, that you are grateful for what's in front of you several times, and that helps humble yourself to what's ahead of you. The other thing that we practice is a balance between expertise and humility. And those two things tend to be at odds a lot of the time. But, our clients, our constituents, our stakeholders, our audiences, they want to know that we're the expert in the room. Any leader should be the expert on something. But at the same time, we're not all rocket scientists. And if we walk into a room full of them, we can't expect to be experts on their work. And so the way that we practice that is by, celebrating when, our team members say things like, well, I don't have your head for this, but here's what I know, and here's what I can contribute to. And just that little tension, that little two-sided coin is a great way to dial up executive presence in future leaders.
That's great, Jim. Do you have some perspective on this?
I do. I think understanding feedback and context is really important for this issue. It's a balance, right? When you want to inspire confidence in someone else, you need to display it yourself. When you want to try to create a compelling vision of the future, you need to be able to tell a story, right? But I think it's about understanding the moment that you're about to enter and what you can contribute to it. And as Eric just pointed out, sometimes on rare occasion, I am the subject matter expert, but often I'm trying to help a group get somewhere else. We use a reframing technique that I think is really powerful. They use in a lot of different places. And one of the reframes we use for executive presence is, it's not about me. Now that seems really obvious, but when you enter a situation, it's not about me. We're trying to get to a point, solve a problem, help an employee, help a customer, whatever the case is. And the next set of questions that follow that usually involve what else do I want to accomplish here, and who else can contribute to that? You walk down that path purposely, you can reach a little bit of balance between confidence and then not get to arrogance.
So several of you have talked about, you've mentioned the term moments or key moments. Can you elaborate a bit on what that means in this context, how it plays into either showing or developing executive presence? Eric, you just mentioned it, you were talking a bit, so I'll put the spotlight on you to start with, if you don't mind.
No, that's great. That's great. I think, for lack of a better explanation, we really do look back on our lives and on our experiences, and especially at work. It's not any one moment necessarily, but it is the sum total of all the moments that define a person's relationship with their work. And that is, you can call that employment branding, you can call that storytelling, but what it is it's persistent and consistent communications. I tend to think about it like, we don't really have relationships with our companies. We have relationships with the brands that our companies communicate through. It's almost like a heater. You don't really have a relationship with your heater, you have a relationship with the heat. And so a leader's responsibility is to communicate on behalf of the brand in those moments when they matter to the people that they represent and the people that they support. So those moments could be moments of tension, those moments could be moments of pride, they could be moments of celebration, they could be moments of loss. And boy, in the last couple of years, it's like we've experienced them all at once in a blender. it's not, it's now, we are all surrounded by all of those emotions constantly. And so leaders need to show up differently in those moments.
Dude,
Yes, sir, Jim, to either of you. Okay. Go ahead, Jim.
I mean, they come up every day, almost in every hour, right? It ranges from, I have a key stakeholder presentation internally that I want to show up and make an impact into. More and more for all of us, those moments are external. There are the million moments you have with the folks who work for you who bring new ideas. And how do you show up in that moment to encourage them, to help them frame that, ask good questions, grow from that conversation? The pandemic continues to bring us a plethora of moments that are important. And a lot of that shows up with, do I as a leader value the safety and health and the work-life balance of the folks who surround me, right? So, Omicron is accelerating and we have people who are testing positive, or their children are testing positive, or their kids can't go to school because we've canceled school for 3 days while we balance all these things. Each of those moments is a time to show up with how you value work, your relationship with your coworkers, and how you're going to proceed as a leader.
I think there's something too about consistency and how you show up in moments. How I behave in my past moments is going to be a predictor probably of how I'm going to show up in my future moments. And if I show up in a way with my team that, they are afraid to bring something forward, or they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, then I'm not really exuding presence here. I'm not using my moments well. I want them to know, if they have a child who's sick, that I'm going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I hope they feel better. Do whatever you need to do. Take whatever time. Is there anything I can do for you? And I think my team would say that they know that's the way I'm going to respond. And so it makes it easier. So I think the point I'm wanting to make is, know that your past moments, how you respond, is going to set a tone for how people believe you'll respond in the future.
Have you seen successes with people who maybe in past experiences their team hasn't responded to them in the way that they would have hoped, and they've been able to sort of adapt and change how they deal with that?
Sure. I mean, I definitely have seen that with leaders who are willing to listen to feedback and recognize, hey, what I'm doing isn't working, so I've got to do something differently. They're open to feedback. They're open to working with a coach. They ask and they practice. So certainly, I think that's that's something that you can fix, or it is something that you can work on. It's developable, if that's the word you used earlier, I think.
Yeah, if it's not a word, we'll coin it, right? We'll hashtag that.
I like it.
Yeah. So several of you have talked about sort of this, past, present, future framing, which makes me think of the flow of a story. And I know that one of the things that we sometimes talk about with executive presence and in terms of communication is the story that you're trying to tell. And I know, Eric, that's been a big focus of some of your work. So maybe I'll start with you in terms of like what is the role of the story that you're trying to tell?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And yeah, it is all about story. I mean, regardless of context, story is the answer. And that's because since the beginning of time, it's how humans have preferred to communicate and to receive information. It's, some people consider story an art, but it's really a science. It's really more of a chemical preference. Like, we need it on a hormonal level. We need story to help us understand complicated ideas and to boil them down into digestible nuggets that we can then take with us and share with other people. It's how ideas have traveled for centuries. And, if you're a person of faith, or someone of faith, this. It's how do we come to believe what we believe, and how do we practice that faith? By studying stories that have been handed down for generations. It's how Greek philosophers like Aesop passed nuggets of morality through society, by embedding them in simple and memorable narratives that stood the test of time. And so if you have an idea that is important to your organization and you want to see it not only connect with people on a deep and emotional level, but also to make it down the hallway to the next meeting, you'll embed it in a thought-provoking narrative.
Great. Jim or Lisa, do you want to jump on the storytelling?
Oh, I would simply just add to that because I think it's very compelling. I think it connects people to their work, to their jobs, to each other. And I've been fortunate in my career to have worked at some places where we did a very good job of telling the stories about what we do, why that's important to our customers, and why that's important to how I'm contributing, right? So I'm at Link Simulation and Training, and we build training and flight simulators for military and commercial aircraft. And everybody in that business knew how their role contributed to that. And how we do that, we told stories. The flight crews who did the training, developed the software, walked around the corridors, worked with us, told stories of here's how what you do impacted how we were able to accomplish these things. When I was at Verizon, it wasn't just about we want to sell as many cell phones. Well, maybe it was. We wanted to sell a lot of cell phones, but it was what happened post-disaster after hurricanes and tornadoes. How did getting that network back up save lives? How does 5G enable distance surgery or the ability for firefighters to use apps to see through smoke as they enter a building? Those stories made it live for why is this important? And boy, that's engaging.
Yeah, I mean, and nothing to add for me. Storytelling is really important. I think you have to work at it, right? You have to work at crafting your message, telling it in a way that really connects to people, helps them understand the why, helps them understand how they're connected, and that it's concise and easy enough to remember that it's repeatable.
Sure. So, well, let's change gears a little bit then. One of the questions in the chat says, you know, current circumstances, we know that new business applications are up and resignations are up. People are changing. We've probably all seen this great resignation hashtag. And so what, if any, is the role of executive presence as we're going through this potential upheaval in the labor market?
It's a candidate's market, and I mean, it's true. I think I want to go back to something that Jim touched on a minute ago, in my opinion, is around taking the focus off yourself and putting it onto others, and helping find reasons for people to want to choose to stay where they are versus leaving. And part of that is connecting with them, understanding what their goals are, understanding what it is that they're trying to achieve, and how you can help be part of that development for them, or part of their goal, or whatever is important to them. So I think that the piece of executive presence for me in this is taking the spotlight off yourself. It's not about you. It's about the other people. It's about the people on your team.
Yeah, I would add to that, Lisa, that you cannot not communicate. By choosing not to communicate, you are communicating that it's not important to you to communicate. So people in your organization will fill the void. It's human nature. If you're not communicating, they will fill that void, because human beings absolutely despise a vacuum. We will find a way to put our own thoughts and our own beliefs into it. And if leadership creates a void by not communicating, well, then the rest of the people in an organization, the people that leader supports, will start telling their own stories. And those stories may or may not be aligned with where the brand is headed, or where the strategy is depending on those people to believe. That's a lot of what we're seeing that has led to what we're actually calling the Great Reshuffle, because it's not necessarily a resignation. It's just an identification and a restacking of priorities, for people that have said, well, what's important in my life? Now, if the brand or the business isn't communicating what's important to us, well, then there's nothing for an employee to identify with. And how do they know that this is or isn't for me And so they're going to find a way to align with something.
In many senses, David, I think this is it's a great opportunity in many respects, right? And so I think they've said it very nicely. I mean, employees, as they think about their employment, and I know this is one of your areas of research and study and consulting, they want to be valued, they want to be heard, they want to work on things that are important. And boy, do leaders have moments where they can impact all of those things. And maybe for me, one of the things we have alluded to, but not directly said, or at least I didn't directly say it, is one of the things I think is really important is how present you are in that moment, showing up without distractions. And that's really hard because everybody has 1,000 things to do in a day. But if you want to impact those 3 variables and show up well, you have to be present in that moment. Get rid of distractions. Don't think of the next answer. Listen well. And that can really have a dramatic impact.
Yeah, I think that's all really insightful, and I like especially one piece of Lisa's framing, because it touches on my work, is reorienting away from why people are leaving to why people stay and why they choose to stay. So I think that's really helpful. We've alluded several times to challenging moments and things going on with the pandemic and others. So something that routinely happens even without the pandemic is that there's some sort of crisis. There's something going on in the organization or affecting the organization that requires an immediate response, and that's not a routine response. So nobody really knows exactly what to do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as a leader, how do you show this combination, this presence, confidence, poise, I think we've termed it, in really challenging circumstances.
So one thing that we practice and we teach in the courses that I'm fortunate enough to be involved in, the one method we call it thaw, because in crises people do freeze. And so sometimes it's helpful to have a tool that you can tap into at the ready, and we call it thaw because it is the opposite of being frozen. And thaw stands for thanks, help, and wow. And in moments of crisis, there is always an opportunity to say all 3 of those things. Now, whether or not it's, the weight on each of those expressions could be different, but generally speaking, in moments of crisis, when a leader comes to the organization and says, first of all, thank you for something, what you've done to get us here and what you're doing every day. Help, which is either I need your help or here's how you can help in this situation. So you're inspiring purpose, you're inspiring people to be a part of the solution. And then wow is usually something like, you won't believe what's possible if we all band together in this situation and work to get out of it. So thanks, help, and wow, or thaw, is just one tool that a leader can use.
I think in crisis, it's often accompanied by chaos. So I think from an executive presence standpoint, it's about helping quiet the chaos and communicating to Eric's point a moment ago. Saying nothing in crisis or in chaos, people are going to make up whatever message it is that they want to make up. So really crafting your message and showing that you have a handle. You may not have all the answers, but we're going to make it through this, and we're going to, if we don't have the answer now, we're going to figure it out. And to Eric's point, how can you help? How can you be part of this? So I think showing calm and steady can help.
Yeah, and David, those are great places to start. Not much to add to that. The one thing I will say is sometimes it's about just showing up in the middle of the crisis, right? And we can all think of examples when leaders didn't do that. But the first thing is go to where there is the challenge and the problem. And that is often maybe the most difficult step. But once you get there, Lisa mentioned resilience earlier, and I think that's really important. Remembering to center yourself, leverage your strengths, be calm in the moment, and then try to bring focus to an issue. And as they've both said, you don't have to solve the problem immediately. Oftentimes, you're not the person to do it, but it's around listening, understanding what the challenge is. We all have values and guiding principles personally and organizationally we can bring to those places as starting points, understanding the issues and going from there, but building a process. And just that calm in the moment will help people take the next step.
That's great stuff. Okay, I'm going to give a warning to the audience that we're starting to run short on time. So if you've got a burning question you have to ask, you better get it in the chat shortly. And then for our panelists, we talked about chaos, and that's actually where we started from, was this idea of cutting through the chaos and cutting through the noise. So let's imagine that there's so much going on, and you feel like your message is not getting through. Do you have a tip for how you could reframe or deliver differently, or some other way to use your communication to cut through the noise in some way? Eric, I see you nodding yes, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, one key strategy for that is to make it someone else's message, to invite someone else to be the voice of the message, lending credibility to it if possible. There's so many different sources of credibility in most organizations that, if for some reason the medium isn't working, you change the medium. It's like any good advertising campaign. If billboards aren't cutting it anymore, you go to radio. If I, as the leader, am not effective at communicating something, I'll look for a different medium or a different source of credibility.
One thing I would add to that is actually something Lisa said earlier, which is your past behavior will help kind of give people a view to what they can expect, right? And so as a leader, when I want to communicate and cut through chaos, I want to choose my moments right. Not everything I have to say needs to interrupt somebody else's day. So if I've established a pattern, I'm not going to interrupt your busy schedule or call you on the weekends or call you in the evening unless it's really important. That gives me a groundwork to at least get an opening. And then I can think about, well, how do I craft that message? And as Eric said, either change the messenger, or I'll back up to where does my objective intersect with what I know are their goals and objectives, and start from there and come back down.
Yeah, I think I was going to highlight what Jim just ended on, re-looking at my message. If my message isn't being heard, why isn't my message being heard? Is it just not the right time? People aren't ready to hear that message. It's bad timing. Is it that I'm not communicating it clearly? Is it that my message is in direct conflict with what they hope the outcome will be? And so just looking for opportunities, if there are any, to reframe the message.
Super helpful stuff. That's great. It seems like the questions coming in, they're still revolving around this technology piece. So it's on everybody's mind, and maybe it's the forum we're into, but how about this one? How do you read the room on Zoom or in a technology mediated environment?
That's a great question.
So I'll take that one. Remember earlier in our conversation, we said you have to tell people how to participate. And if it's important to you to read the room, we recommend giving people devices to feedback for you, whether that's asking for questions in the chat or asking for thumbs up, like Lisa gave me earlier. It's programming it into your communication, programming it into your talk from the get-go, and making sure that the audience members know that that's what's expected of them. It's a lot harder to do when you're halfway through. It's a lot harder to be, 30 minutes into a 1-hour meeting and say, hey, can you guys turn your cameras on, please? But if you're setting up the foundation of a great presentation or meeting or otherwise persuasive opportunity, you do that at the very beginning. You say, here's how I would like for you to participate today, and here's the feedback I'd like from you when I ask for it.
To add on to that, Eric, I will, if I'm specifically wanting people to have their camera on or need them to participate and ask questions, I will send them something even ahead of time to say, hey, we have this meeting set up. here's what I'd really like to see happen in this meeting, so that they have time to mentally think through it and prepare and know what that's going to look like for them.
Yeah, and not much to add to this, David. I would just say two things. One is I've gotten used to, and to Eric's point, setting a ground rule around, I'm going to ask some very specific questions or check in with you at the start of it, and then do it, right? As long as the group size isn't 100, that actually works pretty well, especially setting it as a norm. The other thing I'd say about that is, here's how I'm feeling are the words that come out of my mouth sometimes as a leader, because you want people to trust that you can step in that space. If I'm uncertain or I don't understand something, I'll say those words to try to get people to lean forward, and that generally does work as well.
I also will, acknowledge when people are exhibiting the behavior that I'm looking for. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you chiming in. It was good to hear your voice. Or, I'll do some kind of recognition so people understand this is what I'm looking for, and that I'm acknowledging it and I appreciate it.
Lisa, I really appreciate how you nod in affirmation when we're speaking. That helps.
that your audio didn't cut out, and that we do see you, and that we are tracking what you're saying.
Right.
Absolutely.
It looks like we lost David, our host.
It does. It looks like we lost David, and it's perfect timing though, because I hear the chimes on the clock across campus and it's 1 o'clock. So I want to thank you panelists for joining us, and thank you so much to all of you alumni who joined us. And if you liked the topics that you heard, please know that there are executive education courses on executive presence and executive communication, and we'll be sending you some information about that and other alumni opportunities in an email to follow. So thank you all very much for your time.
Bye. Thanks, Peggy.
Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.